right?
Okay, but like, I don't think I agree with your, dude. Okay, so fuck. I hate myself for doing this, and we can go read about it right now because I'm trying to strum on you. But like,
Fane, what's up?
I gotta say, Dan, I respect you because I thought I was on the anti-commie list, but I saw you post in chat this morning and I wasn't on it.
wait, Fane, you're 100% a commie. What do you mean anti-communist?
Well, because Dan has a list of commies he blocks in DGG chat, and I thought I was on it, and I wasn't.
Wait, you're not on the...
now.
I escaped the purges, dude.
Well, that's probably just you keep quiet or you don't say anything. I only get the real obnoxious, obvious communists.
Oh, trust me, baby. I'm the most obnoxious of obnoxious.
Well, then you've fucking stayed smart, not coming after me. That's how I get them.
He called you baby.
So Destiny, I have, let's see, I guess I have two big ones and a small one, if you want to go over them. My first one is I want to say that because you operate from a utilitarian perspective, right? You're basically saying that if you maximize the happiness of other people, that in turn, the society you live in will maximize your happiness in a roundabout way, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I would argue that a socialist or communist system would do a much better job than a capitalist system at that, right? Because you're aware, generally speaking, of the diminishing returns of income in like a capitalist economy, right? In terms of happiness.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. So you would agree that a society which fulfills everyone's basic needs, such as shelter, food, clothing, public education, these kinds of things, you're probably going to have an overall happier society than a society that fulfills those things for some of its people, while also giving some of its people commodities like iPhones, internet, whatever. Would you agree with that statement?
Fuck, I'm so sorry. Can you say that last thing again?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll just repeat the entire thing.
Just the last thing about what a communist society would do better than a capitalist one. Go.
Sure. So a society which fulfills the basic needs of all of its citizens, like food, housing, shelter, clothing, public education, things like that, would be an overall happier society than a society that fulfills those needs for most of its people while also giving them commodities like iPhones, fast cars, things like that.
Oof. I don't know. I'd have to think about that one. It depends on what we define as like commodities or more specifically luxury goods and how many people are talking. So for instance, if I could have a society where 100% of the people are fed and have houses and all of that shit versus a society where and it doesn't have like the internet versus a society that has like 99.8% of all people fed and blah, 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 and does have like the internet and cell phones and shit, I might opt towards the other one as being more technologically advanced.
98% is kind of generous, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm being generous, but I'm just saying that I don't think it necessarily follows. It depends on how much of a sacrifice we have to make for like consumer goods and shit. I don't know. That would like if our quality of life like falls so far behind, but I don't know if that has to happen. But yeah, but I'm sorry, I was just qualifying that because I don't think I would agree with that in every hypothetical instance.
Sure. So I think I'm with you on one thing, that democracy, I think, is inherently flawed, right? You have these kind of people who aren't necessarily educated and have the economy of work, right? And frankly, you're not going to vote to institute a planned economy, right? It needs to be a top-down system. It needs to be like, state-run. And I'm an advocate for a planned economy, right? I think it's how we solve a lot of these problems. And I would argue that a planned economy could probably efficiently allocate resources to solve the material needs of everyone, while most likely shrinking a country or a nation or a conglomerate's economy.
Yeah, but how? How the fuck do you plan that much shit out?
Well, I would recommend essentially, I'm going to make the argument that's put forth in a book. I know you hate those, but I'm going to talk about one called The People's Republic of Walmart. Basically, the argument it puts forth is that we already have large-scale planned economies in the United States and globally because you have large corporations like Walmart and Amazon, who essentially their entire supply chain, their entire product line is a huge planned economy that markets demand or that measures demand in the market and produces supply, right? And these aren't, they all cooperate, they all share information, they're all running pretty much automatically, right? You don't have free of market actors within these corporations haggling with each other.
This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're either misunderstanding the book or the book is an incredibly huge waste of time. What you just described is like not a planned economy. Like what you just described, where you have like a ton of different actors involved that are all dynamically responding to supply changes or demand changes, which they do. That's not a planned economy. That's by definition a non-planned economy.
Okay, wait. So if you had an economy, right,
from
where you have a government body filled with technocrats using algorithms to measure demand and then dynamically responding with state-oriented supply.
Okay, so like here's the problem. The problem is you just glossed over the hard part, which is using algorithms to measure. So like In a
Okay.
market,
So how does Walmart and Amazon measure demand?
through thousands of different or tens of thousands of different
Mm-hmm.
firms and individual actors. At every step of the way, you've got people deciding. So in a store, right, like a manager might decide, like, hey, we need more of some given product. For a supply chain, somebody might decide, hey, this is cheaper from this company versus this company. From an exported supply chain, somebody say, hey, it's cheaper to produce this product using this means or this means. Like throughout, like the individual
Well,
from.
no. Hold on.
Wait,
How
yeah.
do we measure demand? Like what the consumer wants,
But I
right?
don't know, based on the amount of shit that people buy.
Right.
And the price
Okay.
that they're willing to spend on products at any given.
Okay. So great. So like looking at a much larger scale, right? So let's say we have a government, right, who uses an automated system of technocratic bodies, right, to measure demand, the demand of the consumer being the
Okay,
country,
okay.
right? We say,
I agree with what you're gonna say, but that's because you're glossing over the hard part. What you just said, just using an automated system to measure it. If that was solved, then I'm 100% on board with the planned economy, like 100%. But what you just
Okay,
described is
so what do you-
monumentally fucking hard to do. Like, what the
so
fuck?
what do you think the hard part is?
The hard
Right.
part is accounting for every single step in a supply chain, even in an individual industry, figuring out how to dynamically adjust the amount of goods or services produced. Like, that is an incredibly fucking hard thing to do. I can't even imagine the bureaucratic body that would be that would be required in order to do something like that at every single stage of like production.
Okay, so how do you think that insanely large corporations like Walmart and Amazon have largely automated this process of having this gigantic fucking supply chain? These corporations that have basically the GDP of a small country, right? They manage all of these different inputs, right, and produce outputs largely without like a huge bureaucratic mess, right? Because clearly they do it, right? Clearly, like Walmart has like hundreds of thousands of suppliers all over the globe. Right? Clearly, they're monitoring this.
Yeah, but
Clearly,
not
they're monitoring
every
demand,
single
right?
thing is like 100% automated. Walmart has invested a fuck ton into their the system that they use to like tag products and check like buys and sells or whatever. Like there is a lot of this that's
Yep.
automated, but there's a lot of human like capital that's involved in a lot of this decision making as well.
Oh, of course, right. But so what I'm arguing, right, is like typically when we go into central planning or just economic planning in general, right, we're talking about the Soviet Union. And the problem with the Soviet Union is there's two major issues. Number one is that the authoritarian aspect of central planning can be a little spooky sometimes, right, because people are often incentivized to distort demand or supply, right, because they're afraid of getting gulagged if they can't meet supply demands. And that's a bad thing. And the other thing is that generally when you are measuring supply and demand and grain shipping and shit on like pen and paper and with like fucking abacuses and shit in the 1920s, it's very difficult, right? And I would argue that pretty much 100 years later, our ability to economically plan has increased massively, right?
Yeah, I mean, like,
you would disagree with that, I would imagine.
yeah, I mean, I guess like so, like, I've actually made this not argument, but I've said before that like something that could be interesting would be the idea that like AI has come so far that we could like literally on a computer plan an entire economy. But man, dude, I don't know. There's a lot of problems, like even on a smaller scale, like shit, like like, are you ever aware of like the trade wars that HFTs get into against each other? Have you ever heard of shit like this, like flash crashes and shit?
Yeah, like there's lots of fucky shit that happens in like the markets every single day because of weird like automation bugs.
Yeah, like, and even for HFTs that are only trading like stocks or derivative markets, or like even for these things, these guys can make mistakes and trade against each other and like flash crash the fuck out of a stock or something. And this is a far more simple question than planning an entire
Sure.
economy.
Well, so the question is those people generally are in competition with each other, right? Two people in competition with each other are not sharing information, right? They aren't cooperating, right? So you're going to end up bumping into a lot of those aspects. In the book, for example, it brings up a counter argument, I guess, against like a free market run corporation where basically what happened is Sears, right? We had this kind of libertarian crazy bought out Sears. And what he did is within individual Sears stores and individual Sears markets, he had departments compete against each other, right? So you had like the tools department not sharing information with like the fucking machinery, with the like laundry department or whatever Sears departments are, right? And so what you would have is these people bumping into massive conflicts of interest, or you'd have instances like the flash crashes where you're mentioning, right, where just dumb shit would happen because these people aren't sharing information, they're cooperating, right? I think like one of the funny examples they give is like on the Mother's Day Sears catalog, there was like a bunch of power tools on the front page, right? Because the power tools department had just like won the raffle, the weird free market competition raffle for the front page of the Mother's Day catalog, right? Which is clearly would be like if you had a marketing department in charge of that, there wouldn't be fucking power tools in the front of your Mother's Day catalog, not to go all with Squad W, right?
Yeah, I don't disagree with this. That like reinventing the wheel over and over again is probably really stupid and inefficient inside of a company. Yeah.
Right. So I feel like that if you have like, so let's say we took the entire field of economics, right? And instead of focusing on the kind of Marxist revolution that we've been focusing on for the last, period of time, where people are continually monitoring the free market and figuring out ways to best like tinker it a little bit in this direction or that direction, how to best collect data, right? If we directed this field towards how to best plan an economy, right? And we put academic research towards economic planning and how to figure out how to best distribute resources using the technology that is available to us. And I mean, fuck, Americans love this scientific advancement shit.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
mean,
like, I don't disagree, but your entire argument is hinging on a technology that hasn't been invented yet. So, like, if we theorize that your technology will work in the way that it says, well, then of course your system would be superior. If you could essentially plan an economy with a godlike algorithm that would account for all the human like needs and could even be more efficient than capitalism because it might deal with some waste that otherwise exists with competing forces in capitalism, that sounds great. But like we're arguing like innovative, like hypothetical technologies that don't exist yet. Like we're literally creating
right
a technology for this argument. Yeah.
right now, we don't need it to be better than capitalism in terms of like it needs to allocate everything, right? All it needs to happen, I think, based off my central premise of like a utilitarian outlook, is that it needs to be able to plan your basic necessities like housing, food, and healthcare, right? If we can keep people clothed and keep people alive, we can keep them happy on a very basic level, and then allocate for labor and production afterwards. I mean, I feel like that would be a better society than the one we currently live in, right? Where I'm playing classic WoW, but like if I broke my fucking leg today, I would be fucked, right?
Sure.
I can afford this $15 fucking subscription to jump around in Ghost Wolf while I talk to you, but I can't afford like some of the basic medical necessities of being alive, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, like something that would be really interesting in this area then would be if somebody were to design an algorithm like that and then like regressively run it over like some past environmental condition and then try to project in the future that it could like outcompete like firms that are doing things right now. Like that would be interesting to me. But I mean, like otherwise we're just arguing like hypothetical technologies that don't exist yet. I mean, if the
Well, then I'm glad to know that if we can put together the meta-analysis, that we can get you into the Marxist-Leninist tomorrow. Another thing though that I took issue with that you said recently, I think you said it today, right? Is the guy was making a dipshit point about NAFTA and about how Mexico is like harmed by NAFTA, and that wasn't necessarily correct, but he was correct in saying that like capitalism requires keeping people in poverty. And you say, well, no, capitalism needs buyers, right? But capitalism just doesn't need buyers; it also needs producers. And as a supporter of like social democracies, do you think a social democracy would work if every single country was a social democracy and had that standard of living, or do you think they're dependent on some countries like China or Mexico or parts of Latin America, Africa, being essentially just like mineral farms or labor production units, right?
I don't. This is so hard because like I can't quantify this, but like I mean, like I'll appeal to like the very basic truism that like economics isn't a zero-sum game. That like gains can be made like all over the world. It feels to me like. So maybe this is wrong, but it feels to me like there have been a lot of different parts in history where people have said like, we can't have every person living in a house. Some people need to be slaves. Every single person can't own their own like vehicle. You know, like some people need to be like, or even more, like some people need to be like serfs, or like living on like feudalist land or whatever. Or some people, can't like we've done this over and over and over and over again in society. But it seems like we have been able to provide a lot of fucking shit for a lot of people that maybe everybody can have like a computer or a cell phone. Like maybe these things are possible. So I mean, like it feels like at every stage of
I agree that everyone can have a computer or a cell phone. What I don't agree is that everyone can kind of have the standard of living and the political freedoms that like bourgeois like democracies have.
I don't know if that's true though. Like if we had like a clean, like what everyone wants, like the clean energy revolution, if we could solve for a lot of problems related to fossil fuels, for instance, in the form of like solar and wind, I don't know. Like a lot of these things become like a lot more achievable, I think. And these African countries are making like huge strides toward catching up to us in terms of standard of living. When you look at like their health expectancies and the economic gains they've made, it's definitely not at where they're not at our level of consumption now. Maybe our level of consumption isn't possible all over the world, but maybe it is if enough alternative energy is researched. Like I'm not sure.
So like I think what I would offer as like counterpoint to this is generally speaking from like a historical analysis, right, in terms of imperialism, right? Like the reason why we did quote unquote imperialism is to harvest other country and or colonialism specifically, right? Is to harvest other countries for their resources, right?
Okay.
And in the past years, as empires have kind of shrunk, because like colonialism and imperialism is harder and harder as people advocate for their own interests, is we've moved to a form of soft imperialism, like what China does today, where through the International Monetary Fund or through like debt ownership in Latin America or South Africa, right, where we essentially have like strangleholds on these countries, or like us overthrowing countries in Latin America, right, is where we restricted these countries' political freedoms or their economic freedoms in order to maintain them as like a manufacturing base, right? Because obviously what China is trying to do right now is posture itself to transition from like a manufacturing base for America into a sort of consumer base, right? Similar to America. Instead of, or I misspoke there. It's trying to transition from a
Okay,
manufacturing base
this
for
is
America
so
to a
like,
consumer base, right?
honest to God, I'm gonna be totally fucking honest with you. Okay, I need to do more research on this, but I feel like this is something that I let people say a lot, but I feel like this probably isn't that true. When I look at like the top trading partners that the United States has, and like we trade with like like our top trading partners aren't like African countries that are being exploited, like Mexico, Canada, China, Japan, Germany, South Korea, the United Kingdom, France. Like, is our standard of living really contingent upon oppressing countries in like South America or in Africa? Now, to be clear, I'm sure that we do to some extent, whether it's to support people for geopolitical gains or whatever, or maybe there's some supply. But are you really telling me that like if we stopped like those forms of economic oppression, that our shit would just completely fucking collapse and fall apart? Like, is that actually true?
In a lot of ways, yes.
Like, this is not fair. I'm not trying to push you on like a specific, but yeah, I'm super curious.
I would love to. So, are you aware of like the history of the production of the iPhone? Like, are you aware of like how Steve Jobs got such a lucrative like contract getting those materials, right? Because you understand that like all of our technology runs on fucking like silicone, right?
Sure, which is like mined, I think, in certain
yeah,
whatever.
like we specifically destabilized like the Congo, I think, to mine silicone, right? And Steve Jobs is an interesting example of this because he and Apple, I guess, is a conglomerate, not Steve Jobs himself, but they got a lucrative contract to essentially manufacture all the parts of the iPhone overseas in Asia, right? Way, way, way under cost because the government over there subsidizes it. And the reason why the government subsidizes it is because the United States put like, and Apple as a like arm of the United States essentially put pressure on this industry through the political process and said, hey, country, this would be really good for country from the United States perspective, right? If this company did this, right? So the country.
Okay, wait. So like real quick. Okay, like I don't deny that it's happened before where we fucked with countries and shit. What I'm suspect of is like, do we really need to continually oppress countries, or is it happening at such a level that that's necessary for our economy to thrive? Or would it just mean that like there would be marginal increases in prices for things like cell phones and shit? Like,
well, like when you say like marginal, like I would probably wager that if like Apple wasn't able to get such a lucrative contract, like getting these materials at such a high subsidy, like the iPhone wouldn't have worked in market, right? It wouldn't have went to market. It wouldn't have been successful because it would have cost so fucking much that it would have been buying a Ferrari, right? Like some of the data. I mean, fuck. I'm playing classic WoW on a computer where all of this shit in this fucking computer comes from somewhere in Africa, right? All of these microprocessors, all of this shit in my graphics card, right? This shit isn't being mined in Tennessee, right? If that country in Africa had a sustainable political democracy, right, where these materials were being mined sustainably by workers being paid a like livable minimum wage, right, and these people all had political freedoms and they had the ability to self-advocate, I would argue that these products would not be available to the average consumer like myself.
And like that's what I'm curious about, because this is like an important claim. Like, let's say that these people did make livable wages and everything. Like, are you telling me would a $2,000 computer now cost $50,000, or would it cost like $2,300? Like, that's what I'm really curious about.
Well, so I would agree with you if it didn't seem like we went through such lengths to like keep doing this, right?
Okay, but like, I don't think I agree with your dude. Okay, so fuck, I hate myself for doing this, and we can go read about it right now because I'm trying to storm on you. But like, I don't feel like what you're saying about the Congo is true. Like, are you telling me that this country was specifically destabilized on the backs of Steve Jobs? Or was this like a very minor thing that happened like in an overall conflict where the Congo has always been destable, and maybe Jobs saw like an opportunity to be opportunistic here and jump in and get like a cheaper supply of some good?
No, the Congo has always been destabilized by like large countries with big militaries because of its resources, right? I'm not this specific example of Steve Jobs and the iPhone, which specifically was referring to manufacturing in Asia, not necessarily Africa, even though that's where the resources come from. It's just kind of like whatever. That's just one like specific example of us like interfering essentially on behalf of a company in order to get good consumer goods to market, right? The Congo has always been destabilized. It's always been fucked over by people with large militaries because people want those resources, right? I mean, this is the entire gambit of like the International Monetary Fund giving out huge loans to people in Africa and Latin America. And then when all of a sudden, like they owe us money, then it's time to fucking design their economic policy, right? So it's beneficial to us. Like, because we've moved away from just like showing up with our military and being like, hey, we've owned this shit, right? Because people are less likely to stand for that. It's really difficult, right? It's like the move from slavery to wage labor, right? One is just much easier than the other. and like it's basically equivalently beneficial for us, right? Like, why would we have a system of slavery? We have to beat people up and kill them and shoot them and keep them in chains when we could just like say like, hey, go work for X amount of money per hour, and like we make slightly less money, but we don't have to invest all this money in like a big dick slave catching force, right? It's the same shit. We don't have to imperialize all these nations with our military, because we can just use our economic leverage to bully them essentially into developing their political and economic systems.
Sure. Okay. So this is all interesting, and I just have to read more on this. But like, I just because all of this hinges on this central claim that the only reason we have the goods we have right now is because it necessitates like some slave underclass working for it, and I don't know if that's true. Even if we have like done these things in the past, like there's always like more complicated, like it's more complicated than just like we're exploiting them for their resources, right? Like we're not in Iraq just because we want the oil. Like there's a lot more geopolitically at stake in terms of like drawing up like regions and who's aligned to who and who protects which trade routes and who you know represent.
But like the protection of trade routes and like the exportation of oil and like who controls who is important because of material resources usually, right?
But it's more complicated than that. It's not just It's not just protecting trade routes so that capitalists can make a lot of money, right? It might be protecting trade routes to ensure like political stability in regions of the world too, because when people get poor, whether it's capitalism or firms or whatever, that sometimes people start to demand political change, political upheaval happens, countries can become destabilized or they're cut off from certain resources. Different types of alliances could break down.
You just said it though. When countries become destabilized, we get cut off to those resources, right? And why do we need those resources?
Because people need things to live, not just to make firms rich. That's not the only reason why we need resources. Because capitalists, this is like a really reductionist reading on.
Well, obviously, but you just said, like you've said yourself multiple times, like the reason why capitalism's good at, right, is making profit off of like selling things that people need, right? Like when people need those resources to live, we're like by definition going to make a profit off of it, right? So if we lose access to those resources, now of course people need those things to live, but it also means we lose the profits, right? Of course, these things are aligned, and of course, it's more complicated than that. But like generally speaking, it does go down to like the material interests, right? We're not living.
We're complaining so much though. Material interest doesn't mean profit for capitalists. These two things are not the same, right?
Okay, so when I'm talking about the consumer standards of the Western world, I'm talking about material interest. I'm not necessarily just saying like, oh, the evil fucking capitalist is sitting in the back. He's sitting on his money bags and he wants that money, right? Well, that's part of it.
Yeah, but
right?
this is like, this is vacuous because everybody has,
right?
Especially if you're a Marxist, right? Your whole historical lens is through like material interest, right? So everybody has material interest. What does this have to do with any particular system?
Because like one system is allocating material interests in a particular way or another, right? Like an American, like our political system advocates for the material interests of the American consumer over, necessarily like what American consumers need to like live and function, right?
Well, yeah, but like, I mean, if protecting trade routes is what gets your people food or something, like a socialist system is going to be just as like
sure.
interested in doing that as any capitalist system.
Oh, absolutely right. What we were talking about in this instance is specifically like military-industrial complex memes, right, in the Middle East.
Well, all I'm trying to say is that like
I think we all, like most of us in this circle, would advocate for a reduction in the military-industrial complex, right?
Probably, yeah, depending, yeah, maybe, yeah, I don't know. It's like it's really complicated, but like. I'm just trying to say that, like, I guess, like, back to the original point, I don't think that we run around the world oppressing people because we need it to make our economic system work. Like, I think that there are definitely some opportunistic actors, but I don't think that, like, some large firm is like, that's where we can get free labor. Like, let's go ahead and go to the State Department and get them, like, rallied into, like, overthrowing some regime. Like, I don't think that that's generally how it works. And I don't even know if we need these countries to be, like, an underclass for our system to continue.
Okay, then I'm going to have to go back and read if.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we would have to.
I'm not necessarily the imperialism understander right now.
Sure.
I do have one more thing for you though. So in the past, you've kind of said that you are not a political activist.
I don't like. Yeah, I don't like.
Stand by that claim?
Yeah, unless you're gonna say like, well, actually, advocating for reason is actually a form of political advocacy. In which case, okay, well, you win. But like, but what I mean is like, I'm not married to like a political ideology, and my goal isn't to like maximally spread that political ideology. That's not generally what I'm interested in.
Okay, cool. So do you think that by your recent interest in electoral politics, do you think that's counterproductive to your original goal of establishing reason and logical thought and supporting the best policies?
Well, no. These two things can exist entirely separate from one another. So, for instance, I can recognize that, like, Bernie has no chance of winning the election, but still say, like, oh, I probably would prefer Bernie's policies to Biden's. These are two...
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you recognize that you prefer Bernie's policies to Biden, why wouldn't you direct your energy towards, like, supporting Sanders and theoretically increasing his chances of winning instead of acknowledging, I guess, that he won't win.
Because it's boring to me. I don't like doing that. It's just not what I enjoy. I don't want to become alienated from my labor.
But through your own system, wouldn't becoming an activist be the most reasonable thing to do?
No,
right?
Under my system, I like to do what makes me the happiest. And becoming like a political advocate and ruining my job and making me hate working every morning is not like the way that would increase my quality of living.
Okay, so we come back to the egoism memes.
Well, no, I think this is like a pretty reasonable argument. Like, would it be better, like for the country if some like highly unelectable candidate got elected? Yeah, sure, but I'm not going to make that my daily mission every day. Like, fuck that shit.
I don't know, dude. I just think it's kind of rough when you're like, oh, I support the best policies, and like, well, I guess this is just running in a circle. I'll just take your answer on its face. And final question: do you remember on the DT podcast when you said it was dumb as fuck? That spoiler alert. Tony Stark at the end of Infinity War, he just snaps the gauntlet really easy when Hulk was struggling to do it earlier.
Oh yeah, I was surprised that he was able to. I didn't understand that. But
yeah, that was the dumbest fucking take you've ever done.
Why? Because there's like this.
Shit.
What's wrong with it?
Look, so thinking about this in D&D, right? You know, when you cast like a magic spell, that your intent like matters and is like part of the difficulty in casting the spell, right? Like you understand how magic works. So like when Hulk,
you know what? I just want to say real fast that what you just said is what every communist and socialist has said. Do you understand how magic works? I love that line. But sorry, go ahead. No, I fucking don't. Have you read
the text? Have you read the book?
I'm sorry, I haven't seen the book for Infinity War. I'm sorry, so what? If your heart is pure, does the Infinity Gauntlet work better or some shit?
No, motherfucker. If you put the gauntlet on with the intention of restoring half of the universe, obviously it's going to react negatively. That's going to be a lot harder to fucking do than, oh, I'm going to kill like 500 people.
You got a source on that, buddy?
Yeah. I got a fucking book for you, dude. I have an entire Google Drive folder on occultism. You want it?
No, what? How does the occult... I'm sorry, I didn't realize that it was directly inspired from the occult. You got a source on that, buddy?
Wait, we're talking about magic. We're talking about the theoretical implementation of magic.
No, we're not. We're talking about the Infinity Gauntlet. That's who says it magic.
Wait. How do those stones fucking work then? Is it science?
Well, believe it or not, every different brand of fiction has its own internal magical fucking systems. What do you mean? That's like saying, like, why the fuck doesn't Goku just cast Avada Kedavra or whatever fucking kebab shit on fucking all the enemies that he fights? We all know how magic works. We've read it in Harry Potter. Magic works differently in different universes. Wait, this is the dumbest take I've ever heard in my entire life.
I have never, in all of my life consuming fictional media, okay, I have never seen a magic system where your intent as like a spellcaster or whatever does not matter in regard to the spell you're casting.
But we're not talking about intent. You're saying that killing people is easier than bringing people back to life.
No. The scale of half. So if Stark wanted to kill
Wait, the
half
scale
the
was the
universe,
same. Stark was trying to bring back to life half the universe, wasn't he?
At the end of the movie? No, Hulk was. That's why it was so difficult, is he was bringing half of the universe back to life.
Hold on. I might be, listen, no, you might have won the whole debate, okay? I might be an idiot. Wait, so when Tony Stark snapped the gauntlet, half the universe is still dead? Just the people on planet Earth are alive?
No, everyone's alive. He was literally just killing Thanos and his boys. That was all he did at the end of the movie. That was all he did, was kill like 400 people.
The Hulk brought everyone back? I thought that when the Hulk did it, I thought it didn't work or whatever.
No, it worked. It worked just fine. It just fucked them up. Because it was hard.
Oh, wait. Well, then wait. Why didn't you just say that? Wait, what?
Well, I'm sorry. I thought that you watched the movie. My mistake. I should have fucking summarized.
Listen, dude, it's superhero movies, okay? All I want is to watch people fucking fight each other, okay? Here, I'm gonna give you a pro trick, okay? For me to not understand any movie, as soon as you throw time travel into it, I totally stop watching for the plot and I just watch people fucking fight each other. That's all I give a fuck about. As soon as time travel's in, I stop caring. Okay, but what you're saying makes sense. So you're saying when the Hulk snapped, he brought back like everybody to life, and that Tony only snapped to kill a few people?
Yes, that's why it was so easy for him, even though it was like killed him. But he was able to put the gauntlet on and do it.
Oh, well, in that case, why did it kill him if he was just killing a few people? What the fuck?
Because the release of energy was still powerful enough to fry his human body, right?
What a loser.
Listen, you fucking communists. Other people have real topics to cover here instead of
fucking... Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought socialism and communism wasn't...
Oh, see that. All right.
Wait, why did Tony kill himself snapping then? Were they even going to lose that fight? I thought they had like Captain Marvel and all the people there. Why would Tony suicide? Was there even a reason for it? Now I got to go back and rewatch this. Now I feel like I have... Thanos was about to snap again? But Tony had the gauntlet. Why don't they ever just fly away with it? Like, why didn't Captain Marvel just grab it and just fly away? Or why didn't Captain Marvel snap it? Isn't she supposed to be like one of the most powerful fucking dudes? Supply of widgets is going to remain the same, and the price, we wouldn't expect to see that price decrease or increase at all. It would stay the same. So no, if somebody wanted to make widgets out of widgets, they would.